I once had landlords that illegally broke into the apartment that I was living in, and I caught them on video doing it. Do you want to see the video? Don't worry, I'm going to show you, but we have some stuff to get through before we get to that point. This is officially part 0 of what is definitely going to be a many-part series, and you know I don't normally do parts, okay? You know I don't. I told myself when I started this account that if I ever for some reason reached 500,000 followers, I would tell this story. And that day has finally come. You know why I waited so long? Because this is epically long, and it deserves a motherfucking audience, and I know you guys will appreciate it. I just know it. Here's the deal, okay? The story that I'm going to tell you spans over 6 months, and it is essentially 3 major incidents, the last of which is them breaking into our apartment. I personally don't even think that's the worst thing they did, but we'll get there. Before I can tell you all of that, I have to give you some background lore in order for it to make sense and move quickly. So that's what this video is going to be, is background lore. I gotta find the whiteboard, hold on. Like I said, this story consists of 3 major incidents over the course of 6 months, the last of which being they broke into our apartment and I got them on video. Once we get out of part 0 and get into part 1, I'm gonna start right away with the first incident. However, for any of this to make sense, I need to start by telling you some of the stuff that happened before because it comes into play at the very end. And also I need to tell you about like other instances that weren't huge, but also definitely contributed to this whole situation. I don't know if I'll have enough time in part 0 to tell you about these. I might have to do that as we're telling the tale, but this is what this video is. Does that make sense? Let's introduce our characters, shall we? On this side, we have me and my ex-girlfriend. You can tell because I'm Kay and I'm just gonna call her my ex the whole time probably, so we're just gonna go with X. On this side, we have our landlords and they are a straight couple and we're gonna give them fake names, Grace and Steve. I don't know why I picked those, I just did. Now, here is my disclaimer, legal and otherwise. This whole series is going to be a mix of fucking facts, like screenshots, text messages, photos, videos, the whole everything, and my opinion. I will be often talking about how I felt and how I feel, especially about them. Why? Because this is my opportunity to do so, and I would like to. What I will not be doing is telling you a lot about how my ex felt, because it's none of my business to be sharing with you. There's actually a lot of stuff related to like our relationship that I'm not going to be sharing, a lot of stuff that was going on with her that is none of anyone's business. So just know that there is an extra layer on top of all of this that in my opinion makes it even more insane, but I'm going to be omitting that out of respect for everyone's privacy. But that will not take away from the story. And you'll see that. Something I do have to tell you though is that for many, many years, my ex and Grace were on and off friends for like a good portion of their life. And at the time of all of this happening, they were friends. And that might be surprising because when I say crazy landlords, you think boomer, right? Wrong. All of us are the same age, which makes this even more insane. It's like friendly fire. Like they did us so dirty in my opinion. But here's the thing, if you ask them about this whole situation, they will give you a completely different story. So I don't know. I have facts to back up mine. Personally, I think they're a little delusional, but again, this is just my opinion. Okay, let's get into it. In like, I think 2018 or 2019, the two of them buy a house. And by the two of them, I mean Grace bought a house. It was hers. They are now married, so I'm sure it's like a joint ownership thing, but at the time, like, I'm giving them little rings because they're married now. But this was Grace's house. She was technically the landlord. He was not, which is crazy because he was the one running his mouth the most. She at least had an understanding of like what not to put in writing, and he just kept talking and texting, and oh my god, we'll get there. Anyways, they buy a house. It is a 2-story home that has a basement and an in-law apartment, and that's what will be indicated by this little block. Everything I say here is very important and will come up later, just so you know. But the in-law apartment is an important aspect of this because later they tried to advertise this as a 1-bedroom apartment, and an in-law apartment and a 1-bedroom apartment are fundamentally very different as far as like how utilities are used and stuff like that. You need special permits, yada yada. At the time that they were renovating this, me and my ex were dating but living separately. I was living at home and she was living in another apartment. When they finally finished renovating the in-law apartment, they asked my ex like, hey, do you want to move into the apartment? And she was like, hell yeah, how cool would it be to have my best friend as a neighbor? Absolutely, I will move in. So she moved in 2019. I didn't move in right away for a couple of reasons. The first was that I was living at home, so I was paying very little in rent, and this was going to be a big financial change for me, paying more in rent. The second reason, which is the major reason, is that my grandmother, who I lived very close to when I was living at home, was very sick. She had Alzheimer's and dementia, and she was like rapidly declining. And I just had this feeling that she was not long for this world. And I ended up being correct. She passed away in July of 2020. Pretty tragically, actually. It was like a week long. I don't want to get into it, but it was just very traumatic for me and my family and was not like a fast passing. So I actually didn't end up moving in until December of 2020 after I had saved a bunch of money and my grandmother wasn't a factor anymore. Now, at the time, between me and my ex, we had 4 animals. She had one very old cat and a little teeny tiny chihuahua, and I still have a cat, and I had a lizard at the time, a bearded dragon who has now passed away, R.I.P. Liz. Before I moved in, but after my ex had moved in, there was a little bit of drama happening in the household, and it was because Grace was being a bitch, I think. She knew that my ex had a dog that would occasionally bark, and she, all of a sudden, after my ex moved in, had a major issue with the fact that the dog would occasionally bark, and she would have to hear it. And the having an issue with the barking is not the issue here, in my opinion. It's how she said it. Like, she was just being a condescending bitch about it. And that's how I feel about it. And I watched my ex spend a fuck ton of time and money trying to mitigate the dog's barking. But this was like a major issue. It just kept recurring, and she seemed very stressed out about it. She was trying everything and like nothing was working to fucking Grace's liking. So I bought something for my ex called a Furbo, which is a pet camera that launches treats. But it also has a really cool feature that when a person passes by, it'll send you a notification to your phone that says a person was detected. And if your dog barks, it sends you a notification that says your dog is barking. So you can like open the app and like look at them and see if anything's a problem. The reason I mention this is because the Furbo is what actually ended up catching them breaking into our apartment in the 3rd instance. This is what caught it. So there's like a layer of irony here that like she was such a jerk about the dog barking that we had to go out and buy a camera, and that's what caught them breaking the law. Like, hello? So funny to me personally. Anyways, so now it's 2020, fast forward, and all 4 of us sit down to have a discussion about adding me to the lease and what that would entail. And also, I feel the need to say that there was, in my opinion, immense pressure from everybody, all 3 of them, for me to move in. And I was hesitant to, for the reasons that I said before, but like, there was just pressure, I feel. So like, I feel confident in saying they wanted me to move in. They were excited for me to move in. They kept asking me when I was going to move in. We sit down to have this discussion about the lease, and a few things are covered. 1, rent is a fixed rate that includes utilities. So there is no separate charge for utilities. Awesome. Great, right? It makes sense because this, again, is an in-law apartment. So there's no like separate meter for electricity. There's no way to like figure out exactly what we're using. We can't put utilities in our name. It's just for the house as a whole, and they are living there too. The second thing is there was an addendum at the end of the lease specifically about cigarette smoking, which is crazy. It was just honestly a personal dig to my ex who used to smoke cigarettes but didn't smoke cigarettes at the time of moving in. And it said specifically that she needed to dispose of the cigarette butts like properly. And this is important because later, but that was like specifically an addendum added, right? Next up, this was said out loud. This wasn't actually in the lease, but like all of us are stoners, so we all smoke the ganj. They said, we're fine with you smoking in the house, but you need to pick a room in the apartment and just keep the smoking to that room, which again, I guess makes sense, but also like the apartment is so small that one room is the whole thing. So anyways, and then the most important part in my opinion is that it was written in the lease that in order for them to enter the apartment they needed to give 24-hour notice, as is required by state motherfucking law. I'm running out of time, so like part 0 needs a second part, so I'm gonna go do that. BRB.